A baby rhino kept stroking a sleeping buffalo, and her reaction left everyone in tears. Their unlikely connection transcended the natural boundaries of the wild, revealing a depth of feeling rarely witnessed between different species. What started as a simple touch evolved into one of the most heart-wrenching animal encounters ever documented. The story behind their meeting and what happened next proves that sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected sources. At the edge of a wildlife sanctuary in South Africa, two broken souls were about to cross paths in ways no one could have predicted. Malika, a female buffalo with scars that ran deeper than her weathered hide, had become a fixture of solitude in the northern fields. Meanwhile, Thondo, a 3-month-old rhino calf, had just arrived after poachers left him motherless and terrified. "We've never seen an animal so withdrawn," whispered head caretaker James, watching Malika from a distance. "She doesn't trust anything that moves." The buffalo had survived a brutal attack by predators that claimed her entire herd, leaving her as the sole survivor with wounds that refused to heal, especially the invisible ones. But fate has a curious way of bringing together those who need each other most. On a misty morning, as staff conducted routine checks, something unprecedented happened. Thondo, disoriented and searching for comfort, wandered into Malika's enclosure through a gate accidentally left ajar. The caretakers froze, hearts pounding, certain they were about to witness disaster. But what the caretakers witnessed next would challenge everything they thought they knew about animal emotions. Malika's story was one that made even the most seasoned wildlife veterinarians wince. 3 years earlier, she had been found collapsed near a dried riverbed, her body riddled with wounds and her eyes vacant with trauma. The attack had been brutal. A pride of lions had taken down her entire herd during a drought when they were weakened and desperate for water. She was the only survivor, Dr. Nthabi explained, reviewing Malika's medical charts. "We think she fell into a ravine during the attack. The lions couldn't reach her, but she watched as they took her family one by one." The rescue team that found her described a scene of absolute devastation. Malika had somehow dragged herself to a small pocket of shade, her massive body trembling with fever and shock. When they approached, she didn't even attempt to flee, a telling sign of just how close to death she had been. It took 6 people to carefully load her onto a transport vehicle, her breathing shallow and labored, her once powerful muscles slack under their hands. "I've never forgotten her eyes that day," recalled Maria, one of the first responders. "It wasn't just physical pain I saw there. It was something deeper, like her spirit was broken." The first weeks at the sanctuary were touch and go. Malika developed infections that ravaged her already weakened system. The veterinary team worked around the clock, administering antibiotics, cleaning wounds, and monitoring her vital signs. Dr. Nthabi slept in the treatment barn for 14 consecutive nights, refusing to leave her patient's side. "There were moments I was certain we'd lose her," the doctor admitted. But something inside that buffalo wasn't ready to give up, even if her heart wasn't fully in the fight. Physical recovery came slowly. The deep gashes healed, leaving jagged lines across her flank that told the story of her survival. But the psychological wounds proved far more resistant to treatment. Malika refused to integrate with other buffaloes brought to the sanctuary. She would stand apart, watching from a distance, her massive body tense and ready to flee at the slightest provocation. Wildlife behaviorists from across the continent came to observe her case, fascinated and heartbroken by the depth of her trauma. They documented her responses, her patterns, her subtle body language. all pointing to a profound state of grief and isolation that seemed impossible to penetrate. "What we're seeing is comparable to complex PTSD in humans," explained Dr. Khatri, a specialist in wildlife psychology who flew in from Kenya. "The constant vigilance, the social withdrawal, the apparent flashbacks during certain triggers like thunderstorms. Malaika is essentially locked in her trauma. The caretakers tried everything: strategic placement of food to encourage socialization, gradual introduction to gentle herd members, even playing recorded buffalo calls to spark her instincts. They constructed special enrichment activities designed to engage her natural behaviors and installed a heated stone in her enclosure that mimicked the warmth of bodies resting together in a herd. Nothing worked. Malaika had built walls that seemed impenetrable. She would acknowledge the presence of other buffaloes with a flick of her ears, but would never approach them. When they moved toward her, she would methodically increase the distance between them, maintaining her isolation with deliberate precision. "She's eating just enough to stay alive," James noted after months of observation. "But she's not living. It's like she's just existing." The sanctuary staff began keeping a detailed journal of her behaviors, hoping to identify even the smallest opening in her defenses. They documented her preference for certain feeding spots, her ritual of dust bathing at precisely the same time each afternoon, the way she would stand motionless for hours gazing toward the distant hills where wild herds sometimes grazed. At night, the staff would sometimes hear her distressed bellows, haunting sounds that echoed across the sanctuary. During thunderstorms, she would pace frantically, perhaps reliving the terror of that fateful night. Security footage captured her standing alert for hours, her muscles quivering, her breath coming in rapid bursts as lightning illuminated the sky. "It's as if time hasn't passed for her," whispered Themba, the night watchman who often sat near her enclosure during these episodes. In her mind, she might still be there in that moment, watching her family die. The sanctuary team began to wonder if Malaika would ever find peace. Some even gently suggested that her quality of life was so poor that more difficult conversations might need to be had. But Dr. Nthabi remained steadfast. "There's still a spark in her," she insisted during a particularly difficult staff meeting. "I see it sometimes when the morning light first touches the savannah. For just a moment, she looks alive again." Little did anyone know that the most unexpected source of healing was about to enter her life, and that the broken-hearted buffalo's journey was far from over. Thondo arrived at the sanctuary on a Tuesday morning, bundled in blankets in the back of a mud-splattered Land Rover. The 3-month-old white Rhino calf had been found wandering alone near the carcass of his mother, another victim of the relentless poaching that plagued the region. The poachers had taken her horn and left the rest, including her terrified calf, who refused to leave her side for nearly 2 days. The anti-poaching patrol that discovered the scene described it as one of the most heartbreaking they had encountered in years of difficult work. The calf had created a small depression in the earth beside his mother's body, a tiny hollow where he had pressed himself against her cooling flank, waiting for movement that would never come. "He charged us when we first approached," recounted Jabu, the patrol leader. "Not aggressively, he was too young and weak for that, but desperately, as if warning us away from his mother. When he realized we weren't leaving, he just collapsed. It was as if he had used the last of his strength to try to protect her. The team had to sedate him lightly to transport him safely, a risky procedure for an already compromised calf. But they had no choice. Throughout the 3-hour journey to the sanctuary, 2 team members sat with him in the back of the vehicle, monitoring his breathing and keeping his skin moist with damp cloths. "He's severely dehydrated and malnourished," Dr. Nthabi reported as she conducted the initial examination. But what concerns me most is his emotional state. He's completely shut down. The examination revealed additional concerns. His delicate feet showed signs of severe sunburn from standing exposed in the open savanna, and his skin bore scratches that suggested he had tried to nudge his mother awake, repeatedly pushing against her with increasing desperation. "These aren't just physical wounds," Dr. Nthabi murmured, gently applying ointment to the raw patches. "This little one has watched his entire world die." Indeed, Thando's eyes held the same vacant stare that the team had seen in Malacca years before. He accepted bottles of specialized formula without resistance, but showed no other signs of engagement. When touched, he neither leaned into the contact nor pulled away, as if his body was present, but his spirit had retreated to someplace unreachable. The sanctuary staff debated what to name him, finally settling on Thando, meaning love in Xhosa, hoping that the name itself might be a kind of invocation, drawing love both to and from the traumatized calf. Rhino calves are completely dependent on their mothers for the first 2 to 3 years, explained Sifo, the sanctuary's rhino specialist who had been called back from a research expedition in Namibia, specifically to oversee Thando's care. They learn everything: what to eat, how to interact, when to be cautious. Without that guidance, they're lost in every sense of the word. Sifo had worked with 17 orphaned rhinos over his 20-year career. But something about Thando's case struck him as particularly challenging. Most orphans show some form of response, sometimes aggression, sometimes excessive clinginess to caretakers. Thando's absence of reaction is concerning. It's as if he's made a decision to disconnect from the world entirely. The team established a round-the-clock care schedule. Volunteers took shifts sleeping beside Thando's stall, providing the constant presence that a mother would have offered. They spoke in soft, consistent voices and maintained physical contact whenever possible. They even played recordings of rhino rumbles, the low-frequency sounds mothers use to communicate with their calves. A special formula was prepared, designed to match the nutritional profile of rhino milk as closely as possible. It contained added supplements to address his compromised immune system and to support bone development that might have been impacted by his period of malnutrition. Feeding times were strictly regulated, every 3 hours, day and night, mimicking the natural nursing pattern of wild rhino calves. The sanctuary converted a small building near the medical facility into Rhino Nursery, complete with temperature controls, specialized bedding made of soft hay over rubber matting, and even a custom-built mud wallow designed to be safe for a weakened calf. The walls were painted a soft earth tone, and recordings of natural savanna sounds played at low volume throughout the day. Days passed with little improvement. Thando would follow his caretakers with his eyes, but made no sounds of his own. He accepted food and allowed himself to be led on short walks around a small enclosure. But the spark of life, the curious, playful energy that should animate a young rhino, remained absent. "It's like he's just going through the motions," said Maria, gently stroking his rough skin during the evening bottle feeding. "He's surviving, but not thriving." The staff began documenting every minute detail of his behavior, searching for patterns or preferences that might offer a way to connect. They noticed he seemed marginally more relaxed during rainfall, perhaps because the sound reminded him of his early days in the wild. They observed that he showed slightly more interest in food when it was offered alongside fresh acacia branches, which carried the scents of the savanna. "We're looking for anything, even the smallest thread, that might lead him back to himself," Sifo explained to a group of visiting veterinary students who had come to learn about rhino rehabilitation. The team consulted with experts from rhino rehabilitation centers across Africa. They adjusted his diet, introduced new sensory experiences, and even brought in an older female rhino named Zama, who had successfully fostered orphans before. Zama showed interest in the calf, approaching him with the gentle curiosity of an experienced mother, but Thando remained unresponsive to her overtures. "She knows something's wrong with him," observed Sifo, watching the interaction carefully. "See how she's rumbling at a lower frequency than usual? She's trying different approaches to reach him." After several attempts, even patient Zama seemed to recognize the depth of Thando's withdrawal. She continued to share his enclosure, but maintained a respectful distance, occasionally approaching to smell him or stand nearby, as if offering silent companionship to a grief too profound for intervention. Dr. Nthabi began consulting with wildlife behaviorists specializing in trauma response. They suggested novel therapies, controlled exposure to recordings of his natural environment, the introduction of various textures and objects that might stimulate his senses, even experimenting with different human caretakers in case he might respond better to certain voices or handling styles. "We're running out of options," Dr. Nthabi admitted during a staff meeting 1 month after Thando's arrival. "His physical health is stabilizing, but psychologically, he's still in crisis. If we can't find a way to break through soon, I'm concerned about his long-term prognosis." The unspoken reality hung heavy in the room. Rhino calves that failed to develop proper attachments and social behaviors rarely survive to adulthood, even with the best physical care. Without the will to engage with the world, Thando might simply fade away, despite their best efforts. That evening, as a gentle rain fell across the sanctuary, a new volunteer named Liam was completing his rounds. He was a promising zoology student who had joined the team just 2 weeks earlier, eager and competent, but still learning the complex protocols of the facility. Distracted by an urgent call about a new rescue arriving the following day, he hurried through his checks, mentally preparing for the additional responsibilities that would come with another critical case. In his haste, he failed to properly secure the gate between Thando's night enclosure and the adjacent field, Malaika's territory. The latch, which required a specific 2-step process to fully engage, was left in an intermediate position that appeared secure, but would not withstand even gentle pressure. As darkness settled over the sanctuary and the staff departed for their quarters, Thando stood motionless in his enclosure as he did every night. But something was different in the air. Perhaps the particular quality of the rainfall, or a distant scent carried on the wind that stirred some deeply buried instinct within him. For the first time since his arrival, he began to move with purpose, slowly exploring the boundaries of his space until his small body pressed against the improperly secured gate. The barrier gave way silently, opening onto the darkened expanse of Malaika's territory. Thando hesitated at this unexpected development, his limited experience providing no framework for this novel situation. Then, with halting steps, he ventured out into the rain-soaked field, moving farther from safety than he had been since his rescue. As dawn broke over the sanctuary, the staff arrived to find Thando missing from his stall. Panic erupted as search parties formed, everyone fearing the worst for the vulnerable calf. It was Themba who first spotted the small gray figure in Malaika's field, and what he saw made him reach for his radio with trembling hands. "Everyone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this. But whatever you do, approach slowly. Very, very slowly." What the team witnessed as they gathered at the fence line would change everything they thought they knew about both of these traumatized souls. There, in the misty morning light, stood Malaika, the buffalo who had rejected all companionship for 3 years, curved protectively around the small rhino calf. Thando was pressed against her side, His small body nestled into the space created by her larger frame, his eyes closed in what appeared to be peaceful sleep. Malaika's massive head was lowered, her muzzle occasionally brushing the calf's back in a gesture unmistakably gentle. "I don't believe what I'm seeing," whispered Dr. Nthabi, binoculars trained on the pair. "She's guarding him." The buffalo's posture was unlike anything the team had observed in her before. The perpetual tension that characterized her movements had softened, replaced by a vigilant but calm attentiveness. Her ears swiveled methodically, scanning for threats, while her body created a living barrier between the vulnerable calf and the outside world. "Look at her positioning," Saifo noted, his expert eye catching details others might miss. "That's a classic maternal protection stance. See how she's angled herself to monitor all approaches while keeping him in the lee of her body? That's instinctive behavior, not something she's improvising." The team watched in stunned silence as Malaika shifted her weight, adjusting her position to better shield the calf from the morning breeze. When Thando stirred, making the first sound they had heard from him, a soft, inquiring rumble. She responded with a low, throaty call of her own. The communication between species should have been impossible, yet something profound was clearly passing between them. They recognized something in each other, Sifo said softly. A shared wound. James, who had worked with Malaika since her rescue, wiped tears from his eyes. 3 years, he murmured. 3 years we've tried everything to break through to her. Who would have thought it would be this little one who finally reached her? The immediate question was whether to intervene. Thando needed his scheduled feeding and medication, but disrupting this miraculous connection seemed potentially devastating. After hurried consultation, Dr. Nthabi made the decision to observe from a distance, documenting everything while preparing for rapid intervention if needed. "I want hourly vitals assessments based on visual observation," she instructed, setting up a spotting scope on a tripod. "Look for respiratory rate, activity level, signs of distress or dehydration. Saifo, can you estimate Thando's hydration status from here?" The Rhino specialist studied the calf through the scope. "His skin elasticity looks better than yesterday, actually. Eyes are clearer too. I'd say he's not in immediate danger, but we should plan for a feeding intervention within 2 hours." As the morning progressed, Thando became more animated than they had ever seen him. He began to explore the immediate area around Malaika, never venturing more than a few meters from her side. When he stumbled on his still unsteady legs, the buffalo moved quickly to support him, allowing him to lean against her massive shoulder until he regained his balance. "She's mothering him," Maria observed, tears streaming down her face. "After everything she's been through, she's chosen to mother an orphan from an entirely different species." Dr. Khatri, the wildlife psychologist who had been consulting on Malaika's case, arrived mid-morning after receiving an urgent call from the sanctuary. She stood transfixed at the fence line, her notebook forgotten in her hands. "This is extraordinary," she breathed. "We're witnessing cross-species adoption behavior in 2 severely traumatized animals. The psychological implications are... I don't even have a framework for this." She began documenting every interaction, noting the subtle communications passing between Buffalo and Rhino. "Look at that," she exclaimed as Thando wandered toward a patch of vegetation. "Malaika is using her body to guide him away from those plants. Those are toxic nightshade. She's teaching him what not to eat." Indeed, the buffalo had positioned herself between the calf and the potentially dangerous vegetation, gently redirecting him towards safer grazing areas with subtle movements of her massive head. When Thando successfully identified edible grasses, She made a soft rumbling sound that seemed to signal approval. She's not just protecting him, Sifo realized. She's educating him. This goes beyond comfort or companionship. She's actively taking on the role of mother. By midday, the team's concern about Thando's feeding schedule could no longer be postponed. Sifo prepared a bottle and approached the pair with extreme caution, fully aware of how dangerous a protective buffalo could be. Malaika watched his approach with alert suspicion, her body tensing as she positioned herself between the human and the calf. "I'm going to try something," Sifo said over the radio to the observation team. "Be ready to extract me if needed." The sanctuary's emergency response team moved into position, tranquilizer guns at the ready, a precaution they hoped would be unnecessary. Dr. Nthabi held her breath as she watched Sifo, one of their most experienced handlers, navigate this unprecedented situation. Instead of approaching directly, he sat down 10 meters away, placed the bottle on the ground, and began speaking in the low, rhythmic tones he used during Thando's feedings. Then, remarkably, he started humming a traditional Zulu lullaby, the same melody the night staff often used to soothe the Rhino during his sleep terrors. The effect was immediate. Thando's ears perked up, recognizing the familiar sound. He took a hesitant step toward Sifo, then glanced back at Malaika as if seeking permission. What happened next astonished everyone watching. Malaika gently nudged the calf forward with her muzzle, seemingly encouraging him to approach the human. "She understands he needs care she can't provide," Dr. Nthabi breathed. "This is unprecedented." Thando made his way to Sifo and accepted the bottle, drinking with more enthusiasm than he had shown since his rescue. Throughout the feeding, Malaika remained vigilant but calm, watching the interaction with what could only be described as maternal interest. When Sifo slowly extended his hand to check the calf's temperature, she allowed the contact, though her eyes never left the human's movements. "Normal temperature," Sifo reported quietly into his radio. "And he's taking the full bottle. First time since arrival. Hydration improving. I'm going to attempt medication administration." With slow, deliberate movements, he removed a small syringe of oral antibiotics from his pocket. This was a critical moment. Thando had always resisted medication, requiring multiple handlers to administer even the smallest dose. To everyone's amazement, the calf accepted the syringe without protest, swallowing the medication as Malaika watched from a few meters away. "It's as if he's trying to show her he can be brave," Maria whispered from the observation post. "Like he wants to make her proud." After the feeding, Thando returned to Malaika's side, and together they wandered toward the shade of an acacia tree at the field's edge. The buffalo lowered herself to the ground with careful deliberation, and the rhino calf immediately settled against her, his small body finding the perfect hollow against her larger frame. The sanctuary's photographer, Ayo, captured the moment with a telephoto lens, an image that would later be shared around the world as a symbol of healing and hope across boundaries. Throughout the afternoon, the team observed behaviors that defied conventional wildlife rehabilitation wisdom. Malaika began teaching Thando subtle communication signals, a specific ear flick that seemed to mean "stay close," a low rumble that preceded potential danger, a gentle nudge that guided him toward water sources. The calf, in turn, began mirroring her alertness, his previously vacant eyes now tracking movements in the distance, his small body responding to her signals with increasing confidence. "We're watching the development of a shared language," Dr. Khatri noted, her voice hushed with wonder. "They're creating a communication system that bridges their species difference." I've never seen anything like it. Perhaps most remarkable was the change in Malika herself. The buffalo who had spent years avoiding all contact now seemed to find purpose in her guardianship. She began grooming Thando with careful sweeps of her rough tongue, removing dust and debris from his hide in a behavior typically reserved for buffalo calves. When a flock of birds suddenly took flight nearby, a trigger that would have previously sent her into a panic, she merely positioned herself between the disturbance and Thando, her response measured and controlled. "She's regulating her trauma response for his sake," Dr. Khatri observed. "That's extraordinarily sophisticated emotional processing. She's prioritizing his needs over her fear." "We need to make a decision," Dr. Nthabi said during an emergency staff meeting that afternoon. "Do we separate them and return Thando to the controlled environment of the nursery? Or do we trust this unlikely bond and adapt our protocols?" The debate was intense. The medical team worried about monitoring Thando's health in an open field. The behaviorists argued that the psychological benefits of this connection might outweigh the logistical challenges. The security staff expressed concern about protecting both vulnerable animals in a less controlled setting. "I've never seen anything like this in 30 years of wildlife rehabilitation," admitted Dr. Khatri, who had returned to consult on the unprecedented situation. "But perhaps that's precisely why we should pay attention. Nature has found a solution where our human interventions failed." James, who had worked tirelessly with Malika for years, spoke with quiet conviction. "I've tried everything to help her heal. Nothing worked. Now, for the first time, she has a reason to engage with the world again. If we separate them, we might lose them both, Thando to his withdrawal, and Malika to a grief that would be even deeper than before." Sifo added his professional assessment. "Thando's vital signs are better today than they've been since his arrival. His hydration is improving, he's taking medication without resistance, and he's showing interest in his surroundings. From a medical perspective, whatever is happening here is benefiting him physically as well as emotionally." After hours of discussion, reviewing literature on cross-species bonding and consulting with wildlife rehabilitation experts worldwide, the decision was made. They would create a specialized enclosure encompassing part of Malika's territory, with monitoring equipment discreetly installed and a protected feeding station, where Thando could receive his specialized care. The buffalo and rhino would be allowed to maintain their bond under careful observation. The implementation began immediately. A team of volunteers worked through the evening, installing camera systems that would allow 24-hour monitoring while minimizing human presence. Engineers designed a feeding station that would be accessible to Thando, but respect Malika's need for space. Veterinary supplies were staged at strategic points around the enclosure, enabling rapid response if needed. Dr. Nthabi personally supervised the installation of a specialized water feature, a shallow pool where Thando could cool his sensitive skin during the heat of the day, with a gentle slope that would accommodate both his small frame and Malika's larger one. The design incorporated natural elements from both species' habitats, creating a shared space that would meet their different needs. "We're writing a new chapter in wildlife rehabilitation," she told the team as they completed the preparations. "Everything we thought we knew about species-specific care is being challenged by what we're seeing here. We need to be humble enough to learn from what these animals are teaching us." That night, as the stars emerged above the sanctuary, the staff watched on thermal cameras as Malika and Thando slept peacefully together. For the first time since his arrival, the rhino calf made it through the night without a single distress call. And Malika, the buffalo who had spent 3 years in isolated grief, finally seemed to have found a reason to move forward. Themba, The night watchman who had witnessed so many of Malika's darkest moments sat in the monitoring station, his weathered face illuminated by the soft glow of the screens. He watched the two thermal signatures, one large and one small, nestled together in perfect trust. "Two broken hearts," he murmured, watching the glowing shapes on the monitor, each holding the other together. In the field, under the vast African sky, Buffalo and Rhino slept side by side, an impossible family forged in shared trauma and unexpected connection. Malika's massive body curved protectively around Thando's smaller form, her breathing deep and even for the first time in years. The calf's small trunk occasionally twitched in sleep, perhaps dreaming of a world where boundaries between species dissolved in the face of a more fundamental truth: that sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected sources. Little did anyone realize that this extraordinary bond would soon face its greatest test, one that would determine whether two traumatized souls could truly heal each other, or whether the weight of their combined pain would prove too heavy to bear. Dawn broke over the sanctuary with a spectacular array of colors painting the eastern sky. It had been 3 weeks since Thando and Malika's unexpected bond had formed, and the transformation in both animals continued to astonish everyone who witnessed it. Thando, once withdrawn and barely responsive, now exhibited behaviors typical of a healthy rhino calf. He engaged in short bursts of playful running, explored his surroundings with growing curiosity, and even initiated games with Malika, darting away only to circle back, inviting chase in the universal language of young animals everywhere. Malika's transformation was equally remarkable. The hypervigilance that had characterized her existence for years had moderated into a more natural alertness. She still positioned herself to monitor her surroundings, but the constant trembling tension in her muscles had eased. Most notably, she had begun to tolerate the presence of sanctuary staff, allowing them to approach within a respectful distance as long as they moved slowly and spoke in calm, even tones. "It's as if she's recalibrating her threat assessment," observed Dr. Khatri, who had extended her visit to document this unprecedented rehabilitation case. "She's learning to distinguish between genuine dangers and benign presences. That's a crucial step in trauma recovery." The specialized care protocols developed for the unusual pair had proven effective. Saifo had established a feeding routine for Thando that Malika seemed to understand and respect. 3 times daily, he would approach the designated feeding station, announce his presence with the same gentle Zulu melody, and wait. Increasingly, Malika would guide Thando toward the station before stepping back to a comfortable distance, watching attentively as the calf received his specialized formula and medications. "She's essentially co-parenting with us," Sifo explained to a group of visiting wildlife rehabilitation specialists who had come to observe the unprecedented situation. "She provides the emotional security and constant presence he needs, while recognizing that we offer nutritional support she can't provide." The sanctuary had become the focus of international attention. Conservation organizations sent representatives to learn from what was being called the Malika-Thando Protocol. Research teams requested permission to study the cross-species communication developing between buffalo and rhino. Donations flowed in, supporting not only the care of the unusual pair, but expanding the sanctuary's capacity to rescue other traumatized wildlife. Dr. Nathabi, however, remained cautiously realistic. "What we're seeing is beautiful and hopeful," she acknowledged during a staff meeting. "But we need to remember that both animals still carry deep wounds. Their progress is remarkable, but fragile." Her caution proved prescient on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning, when the sanctuary's peaceful routine was shattered by an unexpected arrival. The day began normally enough. The early monitoring team reported that Malaika and Thando had spent a peaceful night and were currently grazing together near the eastern boundary of their enclosure. Saifo was preparing Thando's morning feeding, and Dr. Nthabi was reviewing the previous day's health metrics when the radio crackled with an urgent message. "Main gate to Dr. Nthabi," came the tense voice of Jabu, head of security. "We have an emergency arrival. Anti-poaching unit from Northern Reserve, bringing in an injured female buffalo. Gunshot wounds. They say—" His voice faltered momentarily. "They say she appears to be pregnant." The atmosphere in the monitoring station instantly transformed. Staff exchanged concerned glances, all thinking the same thing. A wounded pregnant buffalo arriving in Malaika's territory could trigger catastrophic regression. "How long until they arrive?" Dr. Nthabi asked, already moving toward the medical facility. 10 minutes, maybe less. They're pushing the speed. She's in critical condition." "Divert them to the rear entrance," she ordered. "Direct to Medical Building 2, not the main facility. And Jabu, absolute quiet approach. No sirens, no horns. Minimal voices." As the team rushed to prepare for the emergency arrival, Maria hurried to the observation post overlooking Malaika and Thando's enclosure. If the injured buffalo's distress calls carried across the sanctuary, they needed someone monitoring for immediate reaction. The wounded buffalo arrived amid a flurry of controlled chaos. The anti-poaching team had done their best with field medicine, but the animal's condition was grave. 2 bullet wounds punctured her left flank, evidence of an encounter with poachers who had likely been interrupted before they could complete their kill. Dr. Nthabi worked feverishly alongside the medical team, stabilizing the buffalo while performing an ultrasound that confirmed the pregnancy. The fetus appeared to be approximately 7 months along, viable if the mother survived. "We need to move her to surgery immediately," Dr. Nthabi directed. "Blood transfusion ready, surgical team on standby." As they prepared to transfer the buffalo to the operating theater, a frantic call came through from Maria at the observation post. "Malaika knows something's wrong," she reported, voice tight with concern. "She's agitated, pacing the eastern fence line. She keeps lifting her head, testing the air. I think she can smell the blood." Dr. Nthabi closed her eyes briefly, weighing impossible options. The injured buffalo needed immediate surgery to survive. Malaika needed protection from triggers that could undo weeks of progress. Both were her responsibility. "Keep me updated on Malaika's status," she instructed Maria. "I need to focus on surgery now. Have Sifo move Thando's feeding forward. Maybe that will distract her." For the next 3 hours, Dr. Nthabi performed delicate surgery to remove bullet fragments and repair damaged tissue, while periodically receiving updates about Malaika's increasing distress. The buffalo had progressed from restless pacing to active agitation, making low distress calls that had never been heard since her pairing with Thando. The Rhino calf, sensing his adoptive mother's anxiety, had become clingy and nervous, refusing to leave her side even for feeding. As Dr. Nthabi closed the final sutures on the wounded buffalo, now stabilized but still critical, Themba's urgent voice came through the radio. "Malaika's charging the eastern fence," he reported. "She's becoming aggressive. Thando is following her, mimicking her distress behaviors. We need intervention now." Dr. Nthabi stripped off her surgical gloves, leaving the post-operative care to her capable team. "What options do we have?" she asked, hurrying toward the enclosure while Themba updated her on the deteriorating situation. "We could sedate Malaika," suggested the sanctuary's wildlife behaviorist. "Give her something mild to reduce her anxiety until the crisis passes." And risk breaking the trust we've built? Countered Sifo. She'd perceive it as an attack, especially in her current state. What about moving the injured buffalo farther away? Proposed another staff member. Too risky for her condition, Dr. Nthabi replied. She needs intensive monitoring for the next 24 hours. They reached the observation platform, overlooking the enclosure, where the situation was even more concerning than reported. Malaika was now repeatedly charging the fence, her powerful body slamming against the barrier with force that threatened both the structure and herself. Thando followed behind her, his small form dwarfed by her agitation, making distress calls that tore at the hearts of everyone listening. In that moment, Dr. Nthabi made a decision that went against all conventional wildlife management protocols. Open the connecting gate to the secondary field, she instructed. The one adjacent to Medical Building 2. The team stared at her in disbelief. You want to let Malaika closer to the injured buffalo? Sifo asked incredulously. Doctor, with respect, that could be disastrous for everyone involved. I know the risks, she replied steadily. But I also know Malaika. She's not just reacting to the scent of blood or another buffalo's distress. She's trying to reach something. To help, perhaps. We've been treating her trauma by controlling her environment. But maybe what she really needs is agency. The ability to respond to a situation rather than just endure it. After a tense discussion, the team prepared for a controlled opening of the gate. Security positioned themselves strategically, tranquilizer guns ready as an absolute last resort. Medical staff were placed on standby, prepared for any outcome. With a deep breath, Themba unlocked and slowly opened the connecting gate. Malaika stopped her charging immediately, her attention fixed on the opening. For several long moments, she stood motionless, ears forward, assessing. Then, with deliberate steps, she moved toward the gate, Thando following closely behind. The team held their breath as the buffalo passed through the opening, her powerful body tense but controlled. What happened next would become legendary in wildlife rehabilitation circles. Malaika moved with purpose toward Medical Building 2, not in the frenzied charge they had feared, but with measured steps. She paused at the building's outer wall, directly adjacent to where the injured buffalo lay recovering inside. Then, to everyone's amazement, she lowered herself to the ground, her large body positioned against the wall as if offering her presence through the barrier. Thando, following her lead, settled beside her. She knows, whispered Dr. Khetri. Somehow, she understands there's an injured buffalo inside, and she's offering companionship. Through the night, Malaika remained at her self-appointed post, occasionally making soft, rumbling sounds that carried through the building's walls. Inside, monitors showed the injured buffalo's vital signs gradually stabilizing, her stress hormones decreasing despite the severity of her condition. By morning, the medical team confirmed what seemed impossible. The injured buffalo was responding to treatment better than expected, her pregnancy still viable, her prognosis cautiously upgraded from critical to serious, but stable. Outside, Malaika and Thando remained, the large buffalo and small rhino maintaining their vigil with a steadiness that humbled the human observers. When Sifo approached with Thando's morning bottle, Malaika allowed him closer than ever before, her eyes meeting his with what could only be described as shared purpose. I think we've been underestimating her all along, Dr. Nthabi said softly, watching the interaction. We've been so focused on her trauma that we failed to see her capacity for healing. Not just receiving healing, but offering it to others. In the days that followed, a new protocol emerged organically. The injured buffalo, named Nandi by the staff, remained in the medical building, gradually recovering her strength. Malaika and Thando established a routine of visiting the building's exterior wall, their presence seeming to provide comfort that translated into measurable medical improvements. 2 weeks after her arrival, Nandi was strong enough to be moved to a small recovery enclosure adjacent to Malaika and Thando's territory. The first visual contact between the two adult buffaloes was approached with extreme caution, but fears of aggression proved unfounded. Malaika displayed none of the territorial behavior, typical of her species, instead showing what the behaviorists could only describe as recognition and concern. As Nandi's recovery progressed, the barriers between the enclosures were gradually modified to allow for closer interaction. By the time she was 7 months pregnant, she had been fully integrated into what the sanctuary staff now called the blended family, 2 adult female buffaloes and 1 rhino calf, creating their own definition of herd. What we're witnessing goes beyond rehabilitation, Dr. Khatri noted in her research journal. This is the creation of a new social structure born from trauma and resilience. These animals are not merely recovering. They're pioneering a model of healing that challenges our understanding of wildlife psychology. The sanctuary had navigated its greatest crisis, emerging with a deeper understanding of the animals in their care. But as the dry season approached, bringing with it new challenges of resource scarcity and increased poaching activity in the region, the unusual family would face their greatest test yet. One that would demand everything they had learned about trust, connection, and the courage to move beyond the wounds of the past. In the gathering dusk, Themba watched the 3 animals resting together beneath an acacia tree. Malaika, alert as always, but peaceful. Nandi's pregnant form heavy with new life. And Thando nestled between them, secure in the knowledge that he belonged. Each had come to the sanctuary broken in their own way. Each had found healing in the most unexpected connection. Sometimes, Themba reflected, the heart finds family where it needs it most, not where anyone would think to look. The sanctuary was bathed in the golden light of early morning when Nandi went into labor. The first signs came just before dawn. Subtle changes in her breathing, a restlessness that grew more pronounced as the sun crested the horizon. Malaika noticed before any of the human observers, moving closer to the pregnant buffalo and making soft, rumbling sounds that seemed to offer reassurance. Dr. Nathabi, who had been monitoring Nandi closely as her due date approached, received the call from the night watchman and hurried to the observation post. "How long has she been showing signs?" she asked, binoculars trained on the buffalo enclosure. Malaika started staying close about 2 hours ago, reported Themba. Nandi began shifting positions frequently about 45 minutes back. No active labor yet, but her water broke approximately 10 minutes ago. The team had prepared extensively for this moment. While buffalo births in the wild rarely required intervention, Nandi's previous injuries and the stress of her rescue created additional risk factors. A specialized birthing area had been prepared, a secluded corner of the enclosure with soft bedding and minimal visibility from public areas. Veterinary equipment was staged nearby, ready if needed but positioned to minimize intrusion. Nthabi had spent weeks reviewing literature on Cape buffalo births, consulting with specialists across Africa, and developing contingency plans for every conceivable complication. The entire sanctuary staff had participated in drills simulating emergency responses, ensuring that everyone understood their role should intervention become necessary. Her pregnancy has been textbook perfect so far, Dr. Khatri had reminded the anxious team during their final preparation meeting. Despite her injuries and the trauma of her rescue, Nandi has shown remarkable resilience. We should expect a normal birth while remaining prepared for complications. What they hadn't fully anticipated, however, was the role Malaika would play in the process. As Nandi's contractions intensified, Malaika positioned herself alongside the laboring buffalo, their bodies forming a protective angle that shielded her from view of the main sanctuary grounds. More remarkably, she seemed to be actively supporting Nandi through the process, shifting position when Nandi did, making low vocalizations during particularly intense contractions, and occasionally touching her muzzle to Nandi's flank in what appeared to be a comforting gesture. "She's acting as a midwife," whispered Dr. Khatri, who had returned to the sanctuary specifically to document the birth. This is extraordinary behavior for buffalo in captivity. In the wild, herd members sometimes support a birthing female, but this level of attentiveness between two previously unrelated adults is unprecedented. Maria, who had been filming the interaction, shook her head in wonder. "Look at how deliberately she's moving. It's almost as if she's done this before. But we know from her records that Malaika never successfully carried a pregnancy to term. Where did she learn this behavior? Perhaps from her own mother, or from witnessing births in her original herd," suggested Sifo. "Buffalo have excellent long-term memory. Or perhaps it's simply instinctive, an expression of the deep social bonds these animals naturally form." Dr. Nthabi considered another possibility. "Or perhaps," she said softly, "this is another aspect of healing we hadn't considered. Maybe in supporting Nandi through this birth, Malaika is processing her own loss in a new way, finding meaning in a protective role that was denied to her before." Thando, now significantly larger than when he had first bonded with Malaika, remained at a respectful distance, seemingly understanding the gravity of the moment. He watched attentively from several meters away, his ears forward and body alert but calm. "He's learning," noted Sifo. "Malaika is teaching him appropriate behavior around a birth. This is knowledge he would never have acquired in a traditional rehabilitation setting." The young rhino occasionally shifted position to maintain his line of sight to Malaika, his behavior suggesting both curiosity and concern. When Nandi's contractions grew particularly intense, causing her to vocalize her discomfort, Thando would take a step forward before catching himself and returning to his observational position, as if he wanted to help but understood this was not his role. "The emotional intelligence we're witnessing is remarkable," Dr. Khatri murmured, making rapid notes in her research journal. "He's reading social cues from both adult buffaloes and modulating his behavior accordingly. This suggests a level of cross-species communication far more sophisticated than we previously understood." As the morning progressed, Nandi's labor intensified. Dr. Nthabi monitored carefully, ready to intervene if necessary. But the process appeared to be progressing normally despite Nandi's previous injuries. The most remarkable aspect was the continued interaction between the two adult buffaloes. Malaika repeatedly positioned herself to allow Nandi to lean against her during contractions, providing physical support that visibly eased the laboring buffalo's discomfort. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of wildlife medicine," Dr. Nthabi admitted, her voice hushed with wonder. "They're working together as if they've been herdmates their entire lives." James, who had known Malaika longer than anyone at the sanctuary, wiped tears from his eyes as he watched through binoculars. When she first arrived, she wouldn't let another living creature within 10 meters without charging. Now look at her. She's literally bearing the weight of another buffalo during labor. The transformation is miraculous. The sanctuary staff maintained their distance, monitoring through cameras and long-range observation equipment. Their presence was minimal, but vigilant. A delicate balance between respect for the natural process unfolding and readiness to intervene if medical necessity demanded it. Shortly after midday, the moment arrived. Nandi, now fully in active labor, lowered herself carefully to her knees, her sides heaving with exertion. Malaika stood beside her, occasionally touching her muzzle to Nandi's shoulder in what seemed like encouragement. As the contractions reached their peak, Nandi gave a final, powerful push, and a small, wet form slid onto the soft bedding of the birthing area. A collective gasp rose from the observation team as they witnessed the arrival of not one calf, but two, twins, an extremely rare occurrence in African buffalo. The first calf, slightly larger and darker in coloration, was quickly followed by a second, smaller but equally vigorous sibling. Twins, breathed Dr. Nathabi, already moving toward the enclosure with her medical kit. This explains her size during pregnancy, but it also significantly increases the risks. We need to monitor them all very closely now. The rarity of twin buffalo births meant that the survival rate in the wild was considerably lower than for single calves. Resources typically allocated to one offspring now needed to stretch to two, creating challenges for even the healthiest mother. For Nandi, still recovering from her own traumatic experiences, the challenge would be even greater. Prepare the supplemental formula, Dr. Nathabi instructed the veterinary team. If she can't produce enough milk for both, we'll need to intervene with bottle feeding for the smaller one. What happened next, however, once again defied conventional wildlife rehabilitation wisdom. As Nandi began the process of cleaning her newborns, Malaika positioned herself to block the view from the observation post, creating a privacy screen with her massive body. When Dr. Nathabi approached the enclosure perimeter, Malaika turned to face her, not aggressively, but with clear intent. A request for space that couldn't be misinterpreted. She's asking us to stand down, Dr. Nathabi realized, stopping in her tracks. She's telling us they don't need intervention right now. The moment crystallized something the team had been gradually learning throughout their work with this unusual group. That sometimes, the most effective human contribution to healing was knowing when to step back and allow natural processes to unfold. But the twins? Began one of the newer veterinary assistants, concern evident in her voice. Are being attended to by two adult buffaloes who clearly know what they're doing, Dr. Nathabi completed gently. Our intervention might be necessary later, but right now, I believe Malaika is telling us to trust them. After a tense discussion, the medical team decided to respect Malaika's apparent request, monitoring from a greater distance and preparing to intervene only if clear signs of distress emerged. Through telephoto lenses and thermal imaging, they observed as Nandi successfully cleaned both calves and guided them to their first nursing. Both newborns appeared strong, managing to stand on wobbly legs within the expected time frame and successfully locating their mother's milk. Heart rate stable, respiration normal, nursing reflexes intact, reported the veterinary technician monitoring the thermal imaging. Despite being twins, they both appear to be at healthy birth weights. Most remarkably, once the initial bonding period had passed, Malaika did something that left even the most experienced wildlife specialists speechless. She approached the smaller of the twins, the one that appeared slightly weaker, and began to gently clean it with her tongue, supporting its small body as Nandi focused on the stronger calf. She's co-parenting, Dr. Khatri whispered, frantically taking notes. She's literally helping care for the more vulnerable twin. This goes beyond empathy or social bonding. This is active caretaking behavior across what should be family boundaries. Saifo, who had witnessed countless wildlife births throughout his career, shook his head in amazement. In all my years working with Cape buffalo, I've never seen anything like this. Females in a herd will sometimes assist with protection of calves. But this level of direct care from a non-related female is extraordinary. The smaller calf, initially somewhat lethargic compared to its sibling, visibly responded to Malaika's attentions, as she gently stimulated its body with her rough tongue, a technique that helped activate circulation and respiratory function. The calf became more alert, its movements stronger and more coordinated. "She's literally saving that calf's life," Dr. Nathabi observed. "The stimulation she's providing is exactly what a smaller twin needs to thrive. It's as if she instinctively knows which one requires additional support." Over the next several hours, a beautiful choreography emerged between Nandi and Malaika. They worked seamlessly together, supporting the twins as they gained strength, protecting them when sanctuary sounds startled their sensitive ears, guiding them back when they strayed too far on unsteady legs. Throughout it all, Thando remained nearby, watching with evident fascination as the tiny calves, now his adoptive siblings in this most unusual family, took their first steps in the world. When one of the calves stumbled near him, the young Rhino froze, clearly uncertain how to respond to such a tiny, fragile creature. Malaika immediately moved closer, demonstrating through her own gentle interactions how to behave around the newborns. Thando observed attentively, then lowered his head to carefully sniff the calf without making contact. A perfect mimicry of Malaika's earlier cautious approach. "He's learning appropriate interspecies behavior directly from her," Dr. Khatri noted with excitement. "This is social learning crossing species boundaries, something many researchers have claimed is impossible at this level of sophistication." By evening, when Dr. Nathabi was finally able to approach for a medical assessment, both calves were nursing successfully and showing all signs of normal development, despite the challenges of a twin birth. Nandi appeared to be recovering well from the delivery, and, perhaps most significantly, allowed the doctor's approach with minimal anxiety, seeming to understand that these humans were part of her extended support system. The examination confirmed what the team had observed from a distance. Both calves were healthy, with the smaller one benefiting tremendously from the extra attention provided by Malaika. Their vital signs were strong, reflexes intact, and initial bonding with their mother firmly established. "We need names for them," Maria suggested as the team gathered for their evening meeting, spirits high with the success of the day. The naming of animals at the sanctuary followed a careful protocol. Names were chosen to honor the animals' heritage and acknowledge their individual journeys, while avoiding anthropomorphism that might interfere with their eventual reintegration to the wild, if possible. For the male calf, the larger one, I suggest Themba, offered Sifo. It means hope in Xhosa. And for the female, perhaps Nala, gift in Swahili. They represent both to us and to their mother. After much discussion, the twins were named Themba, hope, for the stronger male calf, and Nala, gift, for his smaller sister. The names seemed fitting for calves born into such extraordinary circumstances, symbols of renewal and possibility in a sanctuary dedicated to healing. As darkness fell over the sanctuary, the unusual family settled together in the soft bedding of the birthing area. Nandi lay on her side, allowing both calves easy access to nurse. Malaika positioned herself protectively at their backs, her body creating a windbreak and her watchful gaze scanning their surroundings. Thando completed the circle, settling at a respectful distance, but clearly considering himself part of this new family configuration. "I think we're witnessing the formation of something entirely new in wildlife social structures," Dr. Khatri said softly, as the team prepared to leave the observation post for the night. not just animals coexisting or tolerating each other's presence, but actively creating a blended family unit with defined roles and mutual support. The arrival of the twins marked a new chapter for the sanctuary. What had begun as an emergency intervention for two traumatized individuals, Malaika and Thando, had blossomed into something no one could have predicted. A blended family of 5 animals spanning 2 species, creating their own definition of herd and healing. The first weeks after the birth brought new challenges and revelations. Caring for twin calves demanded tremendous energy from Nandi, and the sanctuary staff watched carefully for signs that she might need supplemental support. But the presence of Malaika as co-caregiver seemed to make a critical difference. When Nandi needed to rest or graze, Malaika would stay with the calves, positioning herself to shield them from sun or wind, alert to any approach from other sanctuary residents. Most remarkably, she seemed to have developed a special bond with the smaller female calf, Nala. While Nandi tended to focus more attention on the somewhat needier Themba, Malaika often guided Nala, gently encouraging her exploration while maintaining protective vigilance. The result was that both calves received abundant attention and care, developing at a healthy pace despite the challenges of being twins. Thando's relationship with the newborns evolved in fascinating ways as well. Initially cautious and uncertain, he gradually began to interact with the calves under Malaika's watchful supervision. By the end of the first week, he had developed what the team could only describe as a playful relationship with them, particularly with Themba, who showed early signs of the curious, adventurous temperament that characterized many male buffalo calves. "He's teaching them games," Sifo observed one morning, watching as Thando demonstrated a peculiar behavior, pushing a fallen branch with his nose, then stepping back as if inviting Themba to try. "Look at that. He's actually showing frustration that they can't play with him yet. He's waiting for them to grow up." News of the unusual family spread rapidly through conservation circles and beyond. The sanctuary's social media posts showing Thando gently interacting with the newborn calves went viral, bringing international attention to their work. Researchers from universities worldwide requested permission to observe and document the unprecedented social structure. Donations flowed in, allowing the sanctuary to expand its rehabilitation programs for other traumatized wildlife. "We've received inquiries from 17 different research institutions in the past week alone," reported the sanctuary's communications director during a staff meeting. "Everyone from behavioral ecologists to neurobiologists wants to study what's happening here, and public interest is extraordinary. Our donation platform crashed twice from the volume of traffic." The sanctuary's leadership team worked carefully to balance research access with the well-being of the animals. A limited number of qualified observers were permitted at scheduled times, with strict protocols to ensure their presence didn't disrupt the delicate social dynamics developing in the enclosure. Dr. Khatri, whose initial consultation had extended into a long-term research project, began developing what she called the Malaika Protocol, a revolutionary approach to wildlife trauma recovery that emphasized social connection across traditional boundaries. "What we're learning here challenges fundamental assumptions about animal psychology," she explained during a presentation to the sanctuary's board of directors. "We've always approached rehabilitation from a species-specific perspective, attempting to recreate natural social structures. But these animals are showing us that healing can sometimes come from unexpected connections that transcend biological categories." The protocol she outlined incorporated key elements observed in the unusual herd. The importance of allowing traumatized animals to exercise agency in their healing process. The potential benefits of cross-species socialization in specific circumstances. and the recognition that animals, like humans, might sometimes need non-traditional support systems to recover from profound trauma. "We're not suggesting this approach would work in all cases," she emphasized. "But for animals who have experienced severe trauma and failed to respond to conventional rehabilitation methods, the Malaika Protocol offers an alternative pathway to healing, one that acknowledges the sophisticated emotional lives of these creatures and their capacity to form meaningful connections beyond species boundaries." The board unanimously approved funding for a 3-year research initiative to further develop and test the protocol, with the unusual family at its center, but extending to carefully selected other cases where traditional approaches had proven ineffective. As the twins grew stronger over the following weeks, the dynamics of the blended family continued to evolve in fascinating ways. Malaika maintained her role as co-parent, particularly bonding with the smaller female calf, Nala, who often sought her out for comfort and protection. Thondo, now nearly a year old, developed a playful relationship with the male calf, Themba, initiating gentle games that helped the young buffalo develop coordination and strength. One particularly notable behavior emerged around feeding time. Buffalo calves typically nurse exclusively from their mothers for the first several months of life. But in this unusual family, a different pattern developed. While both calves primarily nursed from Nandi, they would occasionally approach Malaika in a nursing posture. Though she had no milk to offer, she would stand patiently as they nuzzled against her, providing comfort and connection even without nutritional benefit. This suggests the relationship goes beyond practical caretaking, Dr. Khatri noted in her research journal. The calves are seeking emotional comfort from Malaika, and she's responding to that need, even though she can't provide the physical nourishment they associate with the behavior. This indicates a level of emotional sophistication in their interactions that transcends instinctive responses. Nandi, fully recovered from birth, displayed none of the territorial behavior that might have been expected. Instead, she seemed to welcome Malaika's assistance, particularly when caring for twins proved challenging. The 2 adult buffaloes developed a synchronized approach to parenting, taking turns watching over the calves and creating protected spaces for them to rest. They even developed what appeared to be a communication system, specific vocalizations that seemed to signal "your turn," or "come quickly," or "all is well." The sanctuary's bioacoustic specialist began recording and analyzing these calls, discovering subtle patterns that suggested a developing shared language between the 2 adult females. They're creating a cooperative parenting model that doesn't typically exist in wild buffalo herds to this extent, observed Dr. Nthabi. In the wild, related females might share some caretaking responsibilities, but this level of coordination between unrelated adults is exceptional. Dr. Nthabi documented these developments with meticulous attention, aware that they were witnessing something unprecedented in wildlife rehabilitation. The level of cooperation we're seeing goes beyond convenience or circumstance. She noted in her research journal, "There appears to be genuine attachment between these animals, a chosen family bond rather than merely a situation of mutual tolerance." This observation was dramatically confirmed one evening when a severe thunderstorm swept across the sanctuary. As lightning flashed and thunder rolled across the landscape, the human observers expected the animals to display the typical stress responses of their species. Instead, they watched in amazement as the 5 animals gathered together beneath a sheltered overhang, positioning themselves in a protective formation. The 2 adult buffaloes on the outside, creating a buffer against the elements, with the 3 young ones, 2 calves and 1 rhino, nestled safely between them. "They're not just coexisting," Saifo observed, watching through night vision equipment. They're actively protecting each other. Look at how Malaika and Nandi have positioned themselves to block the wind from the young ones. And see how Thondo is actually comforting the twins? He's using the same rumbling sounds Malaika used with him when he first arrived. The most remarkable aspect was how the group responded when a particularly loud thunderclap startled Nala, causing the small calf to cry out in distress. Before Nandi could respond, Thondo had already moved closer to the frightened calf, gently touching his nose to her side in a gesture unmistakably meant to reassure. It was the same comfort behavior Malaika had shown to him during his early days at the sanctuary, now being passed on to the next generation of this unusual family. He's not just receiving care anymore, Dr. Khatri noted with excitement. He's becoming a caregiver himself. That represents an extraordinary psychological journey from the traumatized, withdrawn calf who arrived here. The storm passed, but the image of that protective circle remained etched in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. A powerful symbol of what was possible when trauma gave way to connection, when healing happened not in isolation, but in relationship. The Sanctuary's education department developed a new program based on the unusual family, using their story to teach visitors about animal emotions, trauma recovery, and the surprising adaptability of wildlife in challenging circumstances. School groups were particularly moved by the tale of different species coming together to support each other, finding in it lessons about acceptance and community that transcended the animal kingdom. The children connect with this story on a profound level, reported the education coordinator. Many of them come from challenging backgrounds themselves, and they see their own possibilities for healing reflected in these animals. One little boy told me, "If a rhino and buffalo can be family, then maybe I can find my family too, even if we don't match." As the dry season progressed, bringing new challenges to the sanctuary, the unusual family continued to thrive. The twins grew rapidly, their playful antics bringing joy to everyone who observed them. Thondo, once so withdrawn and fragile, had developed into a confident young rhino who moved with purpose and engaged fully with his surroundings. Nandi's previous injuries had healed completely, leaving only faint scars as testament to her ordeal. And Malaika, perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all, had evolved from a traumatized, isolated individual into a cornerstone of this unconventional family. Her protective instincts channeled into nurturing connections rather than defensive withdrawal. The sanctuary team began cautious discussions about the long-term future of this unusual group. In traditional wildlife rehabilitation, the goal was always reintroduction to the wild when possible. But the unique social structure that had developed raised complex questions about what would truly serve these animals' well-being. Separating them would likely cause significant psychological distress, Dr. Khatri advised during a planning meeting. They've formed genuine attachment bonds that meet real emotional needs. At the same time, we have to consider their natural biological imperatives and whether this environment allows them to express the full range of their species-specific behaviors. After extensive consultation with wildlife management experts, conservation ethicists, and animal welfare specialists, a novel approach was developed. The creation of a protected, semi-wild reserve where the family could remain together while living in conditions that closely mimicked their natural habitat. The sanctuary acquired additional land adjacent to their existing property, creating a 500-hectare protected area with diverse ecosystems and carefully managed predator exclusions. This isn't a perfect solution, Dr. Nthabi acknowledged, but it represents our best attempt to honor both the unique social bonds these animals have formed and their biological needs as buffalo and rhino. They'll have space to express natural behaviors, protection from poaching and predation, and the freedom to maintain their chosen family structure. One morning, as the first light of dawn painted the sanctuary in soft gold, Dr. Nathabi stood at the observation post, watching the 5 animals grazing peacefully together. Themba approached her side, his weathered face creased in a gentle smile. "When Malaika first came to us," he said quietly, "I feared she would never recover. The light had gone out of her eyes. Now look at her, surrounded by family, filled with purpose." Dr. Nathabi nodded, thinking of all they had learned from these remarkable animals. "They've taught us something profound about healing," she replied. "That sometimes the path forward isn't about returning to what was lost, but about creating something entirely new." As if hearing her words, Malaika raised her head at that moment, her gaze meeting the doctor's across the distance. In the buffalo's eyes was a clarity and presence that had been absent for so long, the look of an animal fully engaged with her present rather than haunted by her past. The unusual family continued their morning grazing, moving together across the landscape. 2 adult buffaloes, 2 buffalo calves, and 1 young rhino, creating their own definition of herd with every step. They had each arrived at the sanctuary broken in their own way. They had found healing in the most unexpected connections, and in doing so, they had opened new possibilities for understanding the profound resilience of the natural world. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the sanctuary grounds, the 5 animals moved toward the shade of an acacia tree, settling into their customary formation. Adults on the outside, youngsters protected within. In that peaceful tableau was a truth both simple and profound. That sometimes the heart finds family where it needs it most, not where anyone would think to look. And in that finding, healing begins. The sanctuary's work would continue, evolving based on what these extraordinary animals had taught them. New protocols would be developed, new understandings of trauma and recovery would emerge, and new possibilities for conservation would unfold. But at the heart of it all would remain this remarkable story. A buffalo who mothered a rhino, who together welcomed another wounded buffalo, who together raised twin calves in a blended family that defied all conventional wisdom. Their legacy would extend far beyond the boundaries of the sanctuary, challenging humans to reconsider what they thought they knew about the emotional lives of animals, the nature of family, and the remarkable capacity for healing that exists in the natural world. In their unlikely connection, these 5 creatures had become teachers to all who encountered their story, ambassadors of hope in a world too often defined by separation and loss. As twilight settled over the sanctuary that evening, bringing the soft chorus of night insects and distant calls of nocturnal birds, the unusual family slept peacefully together beneath the stars, different in form but united in the most essential way, by the bonds of love and belonging. They had created together, one day at a time, healing each other's wounds in ways no one could have imagined possible.